Hello and welcome to another session of Karen's Colours. I'm Dr. Karen and these are my colour conversations. This week we're going to be looking at a film from a very special lady. This time it's from the late Maggie Smith, who died this last fortnight. She had a very long and distinguished career, and this is one of the last films in which she took the primary role. It's called The Lady in the Van, and it hails from 2015. If you haven't seen it, it's well worth the look. Before we get started again, I'd like to welcome once again those of you who've been following this series of videos on colour analyses of various films. I'd also like to welcome any new viewers and any new subscribers as well. You're always welcome here. If you like the sort of work I'm doing, give it a like. That helps the algorithm along. But otherwise, please sit back and enjoy. This week's offering, The Lady in the Van. The film The Lady in the Van involves two main characters. And as usual, we'll be dealing with the costume colours used within the film for both these characters, focusing specifically on the role of Miss Shepherd, a rather irascible lady whose story was taken from a real live situation where a writer moved into his house in London, where an old lady moved her van into his yard, and then, even though agreeing to stay only a few months, remained there for 15 years. This story, of course, is a fictionalised version, and as such, there are some liberties taken with her life. The story of The Lady in the Van involves two characters, and as usual, we'll be dealing with the costume colours worn by those two characters, focusing mostly on the character played by Maggie Smith. Because of the nature of the clothing worn by the protagonists in the film and the limited number of colours that are available, I'm also going to be examining the colour interactions between the primary character, that is Miss Shepherd, and the objects with which she interacts. So let's begin. Our first person that we meet is the irascible Miss Shepherd. She was known as Mary Shepherd at the beginning of the film, but also as it progresses, we discover that her name was indeed Margaret. She's homeless, but she's also fiercely independent. The second character that appears in the film as a primary character is Mr. Alan Bennett, who is the writer and also the narrator of the events within the film. He is rather unusual in that he plays the part of two personas, himself as the writer and narrator, and also himself as the person who lives the experiences that are portrayed within the film. There are also a number of supporting characters. I won't be dealing with the colours that are portrayed by these characters because that would make this video far too long. However, it's important to note that the two main characters do not focus entirely on themselves. The first of the neighbours that we meet are a pair of pretentious yuppies who live closest to Alan. Then there is a large family headed by a woman who offers food and gifts to Miss Shepherd as part of her neighbourly Christian behaviour. And then there is a single woman who is the town's gossip. There are also family members such as Miss Shepherd's brother and sister-in-law. The brother is rather patient with his sister, but the sister-in-law dislikes Miss Shepherd intensely. And then, of course, there is also Alan's mother, a lady who is gradually dementing as she progresses through the film. There are also a number of significant others that appear. There is a man who turns out to be a blackmailer, and there are a number of social workers. And these social workers play an integral part in maintaining the narrative of the story. So let's get into the plot. The opening sequence sees Miss Shepherd fleeing a crash site in her van. She lives in that van in a variably tolerant neighbourhood. Alan Bennett moves into his new home and helps Miss Shepherd move her van down the street somewhat to a new location, as she is wont to move from location to location within the same community, never staying anywhere too long, but nevertheless remaining within that community, so she is well known there. He obtains information about her from the various neighbours, including from the local gossip, who gives him quite a lot of information that starts the narrative rolling. Then we begin to discover things about Alan himself. His mother is gradually becoming more and more demented as she gets older. There is an interaction between the two personas that persists throughout the film, in which the two of them talk to each other and interview each other regarding the various activities in which they engage. Alan himself has a predilection for gay young men, and this is not a major part of the film, but nevertheless it is commented upon on a number of occasions. Miss Shepherd herself has a number of problems. She often is abused by casual passers-by. She dislikes music intensely, and she is involved in intermittent blackmail payments to the man that we later on find out is in fact a policeman. She is assaulted by various rough youths in her van, and she has an extremely guilty conscience which requires repeated confession, which rather frustrates her confessor. But Miss Shepherd is also a rather ingenious lady. She works by selling pencils on the sidewalk, as well as writing various religious-based idioms on that sidewalk in what she calls her teaching of the population. She also is able to obtain some of her needs through contact with various welfare departments. She visits a male person at the seaside on occasion in order to obtain more finances. This, of course, we know as her brother. She's also able to paint her van in order to protect it against rust, which makes it highly visible within the neighbourhood. When necessary, she's able to obtain a replacement van, and she also encourages Alan to allow her to park in his driveway once she no longer is permitted to park out in the street. Later on, she also manages to obtain a three-wheeled vehicle with which to travel around, which she also paints yellow, as she has done with her new van. After approximately 15 years, we discover that Alan's mother is now bedridden and entirely uncomprehending. On the other hand, Miss Shepherd is finally taken by the authorities and given some sort of care, a bath and clean clothes being uppermost on the list of things that she receives. There she finds and plays piano, and this is where we discover just how talented she had been at the piano. She is also found dead by the social worker and her body taken away for burial. And this is where the truths about her life are revealed at the funeral service. But the film doesn't end there. After the funeral service, Miss Shepherd appears to Alan and introduces him to the crash victim that she was fleeing from at the beginning of the film. Her wish is to have an ascension, and Alan writes that into the story, and we see this fictionalized movement up into heaven. And finally, there's a commemorative plaque put on the wall of Alan's house, dedicated to a life well lived, if often misunderstood. Men's costumes in films are usually fairly limited, and the usual colours, as seen also in Alan's costumes, are black, white and grey, which I call achroma, and brown. Now, these represent the good, bad, and indecisive parts of that character, but also their determination. But they're not particularly meaningful in this film, and so I will not be discussing them at all. There will be, however, a focus on his use of red, green, and blue in his costumes. Throughout the film, we can notice the commonality of the colours or hues used for the alter egos. They're frequently in the same colours and costumes, and there is only a difference of whether one alter ego wears a tie or not as to differentiate who is who. The writer part is often without his tie, whereas the lived or experiential alter ego often wears the tie. But that's not exclusive in each scene in which the two characters meet together. So let's now get into it. One of the earliest features of Alan's costumes is often seen in items of red. It, in fact, is his most common hue. In his interactions with Miss Shepherd at the beginning of the film, when discussing his mother's ongoing dementia with himself, when he's being interviewed, when Mrs. Shepherd requests permission to move into his front yard as a refuge, when he's chasing off the louts who have been assaulting Miss Shepherd's van, when his alter ego challenges him about Miss Shepherd's presence in their lives, when she arrives with a new car, when he's arguing with the social worker about whether or not he is actually her carer or just simply an ancillary in her life, when he's visiting his ill mother, when he's bringing the doctor to see Miss Shepherd, when she's taken to hospital for that final care, and at the funeral, where both alter egos wear red. Red, in this case, always represents taking charge and making decisions, and also fending off challenges. Green is the next most frequent colour used on Alan Bennett's costumes, and it often appears as a sweater, a jacket, a vest, or a scarf. He wears it firstly when he meets Miss Shepherd, also when he's helping her move her van down the street, when he's meeting neighbours, and discussing a visit from Mum, when both personas are discussing just what is happening with Mum while one is writing and the other is talking on the telephone. Here, both personas are presented together for the first time, and we get to see the interaction between the two. As he watches Miss Shepherd take her wheelchair ride up and down the street, he's wearing a green scarf. Both alter egos also wear green jackets as they're watching the corpse of Miss Shepherd being discovered. He attends the van opening in that same jacket as he and the social worker open the van to see Miss Shepherd's corpse. Green in this film for Alan represents his struggle with both his guilt and also his values. Less frequently, but also of significance, is the colour blue, most often seen either as a vest or a shirt. Here we see him writing his next book or play, also when his mother is visiting him, when he sees the blackmailer out of his yard and chases him away, when he's discussing the blackmail incident with his alter ego, and also when he is discussing the play that he is currently performing in with his neighbours. Blue always represents work and duty for Alan in this film. The costumes for Miss Shepherd are less colourful, nevertheless some colours do pertain. She's mainly seen in a grey hat and coat as being the most common items that she wears. We see grey in her costumes when she's asking Alan for help in moving her van, when she's working at selling those pencils and teaching people religion from the sidewalk, when she's refusing to accept a green coat from the social worker who comes to visit, when she's out shopping with Alan, on her solo visit to the seaside when she goes to collect money from her brother, when she's settled into Alan's yard, and also when she reappears as a ghost at the end of the film. She also interacts with the grey van right at the beginning of the film. This is her initial home, and as such is an important feature of the colour grey for Miss Shepherd. The grey represents her independence. Grey is often also mixed with brown. Here she's seen in a grey-brown coat chasing the child musicians away. Also, she wears that same coat when she's painting her grey van with that bright yellow paint. Her scarf and cardigan are also grey-brown as she's given notice to move the van, and she wears a grey-brown hat and cardigan when she is painting her red car. This grey-brown represents her resilience, so it's slightly different from the grey of her major costume items. Green is also a feature of Miss Shepherd's costumes. Here she's seen at the beginning of the film fleeing from the crash site. She's wearing a cardigan under her coat, green gloves, and also a green scarf as she is moving things around inside the van. Yet when the social worker arrives with a green coat, she tells the woman that she absolutely despises the colour green, even though she's wearing a green skirt and also a green cardigan underneath her grey jacket. There's also that green interaction with the coat itself in which she grabs it and throws it to the ground. Green seems to represent her fears and her values. In those same scenes with the social worker, we also note that there are touches of red in her costume. This is firstly when she is refusing help from the social worker, then also when she's off buying a television set once she's moved into Alan's yard, she's wearing a red skirt. As she is awaiting care because she has become ill in her van, she has a red blanket over her knees, and when she's being taken into care, we see that that red blanket is really quite bright red as she's wheeled away. These are the only costume items of red for Miss Shepherd. However, she does interact with a number of red items. Firstly, there's the blood on the windscreen left behind by the person into whom she has crashed and is now fleeing from. On her first shopping trip with Mr. Bennett, a barrow boy offers her some cheek. He's wearing red and she bites back at him. She also picks up a red-covered book from Alan's house, which is written in French, and begins to read it, showing that she is also very fluent in that language, something that is of a surprise to Alan. And finally, her red three-wheeled car that she turns up with is also something with which she interacts. Red in this situation represents taking determined action. There are also blue costume items and interactions. When she arrives in her new car, she's wearing a blue scarf. On her wheelchair run down the street, she's wearing a blue jacket during this interaction. And after her bath at the end of the film, she's wearing a primarily blue outfit as she's led back into her changing room. But there are many more blue interactions. Her brother's door is painted in a light blue, and her brother himself appears wearing a similar coloured blue as his vest. Her new van is blue before she paints it yellow. The pram that she has turned into a shopping trolley is also blue, and the pianist at the Mission, to whom Miss Shepherd listens while she's playing the piano, is the first time in which she is actually entranced by music. Blue, therefore, represents her life choices. The most obvious colour in this film is, of course, yellow, although Miss Shepherd does not wear yellow very much as a costume colour. Here we see hints of yellow in the undershirt under her blue jacket when she is requesting that Alan takes her in her wheelchair to the top of the hill so that she can ride down it. She's also wearing that same yellow vest in her care home trip. And as she's taken up into the ambulance, she requests a second ride, looking quite joyous at the opportunity to have such an experience. Then we discover that she also wore yellow as her young self as a pianist at the concert in which she played piano as a solo artist. But there are many more yellow interactions for her. The pencils that she sells on the sidewalk are bright yellow. And of course, the yellow that she chooses for her van paints is a really bright egg yellow. The second van and the car are also painted in these colours. The second van, painted bright yellow and decorated for the Queen's Silver Jubilee, shows a great deal of pride. And similar pleasure is seen as she rides a yellow duck on a carousel at the seaside. Finally, we see yellow as the prominent colour as her ascension into heaven is greeted by God welcoming her home. Yellow in this instant represents her delight in the small things in her life that give her that pleasure. Another colour that appears most infrequently and only towards the end of the film is the colour pink. Here she's wearing a pink cardigan as she reminisces about her past after she's been given her bath and clean clothing. In this same costume, we see her in a darkened room playing the piano for the last time, and then she escapes from the care home, returns to her van, and the next pink we see is her lying dead in that van. Pink, therefore, represents frailty and vulnerability. Despite this paucity of colour in her costumes, there are quite a number of other colour interactions that Miss Shepherd has. Firstly, there is the white notice from the council informing her that she no longer is permitted to park out in the street. She's also given food from a friendly neighbour in a white dish. These are both unexpected actions, and so white can be linked to that unexpectedness. In terms of the colour black, she's wearing black gloves as she flees from the crash site at the beginning of the film, and also she paints a black cross on her dead first van as it is taken away to be scrapped. Black, therefore, refers to her letting go of some aspect of her life that she wishes not to revisit. Black and white together also appear as part of the opening sequence, where there are images of a young woman playing the piano. These same images appear again at the end of the film, but by then we already know what the secret of this particular series of ancient films is all about. The concert performance is important, but we also see her as a young nun playing the piano. And note here that there is yellow in the background of this particular film. Yes, it's a dark yellow, but nevertheless, yellow denotes pleasure. And we can see that in the serene face of this young woman. Black and white together then refer to unrequited ambitions. In summary, red, green and blue, which are the colours that we have discussed about Alan's costumes and also appear as part of Miss Shepherd's life, have slightly different connotations for them. For Alan, red means taking charge and making decisions, whereas for Miss Margaret, it's taking determined action. So nevertheless, it's action. In terms of green, Alan wears it in his struggle with guilt about his mother and also his own values, whereas Mary Margaret interacts with green to determine her fears and also her values. So together, green represents values. For blue, Alan's blue is all about work and about his duty towards his parent and also towards Miss Shepherd. Whereas for Mary Margaret, blue is about life choices. Nevertheless, these are both associated with doing the best that one can for oneself. For Miss Shepherd, other representations are also significant. Grey is all about her independence, grey-brown about her resilience. For yellow, it's about delight and pleasure, and possibly also pride in what she has accomplished. For pink, it's frailty and vulnerability. For white, it's the unexpected. For black, it's letting go of something unpleasant. And black and white together are all about memories and unrequited ambition. And there we have it, a colour foray into the life of Miss Mary or Miss Margaret Shepherd, a lady who had a real life which has been fictionalised in this film, The Lady in the Van. If you haven't seen the film, I can highly recommend it. It does bring a tear to your eye, though, particularly in the scene where Miss Margaret asks Alan to hold her hand. I'm not sure what I'm going to be presenting next time, but if you have any suggestions of a movie that you'd like to see have a colour analysis done, please leave it in the comments below. I'm always happy to take on a challenge. If I haven't seen it, I'll make sure I can. In the meantime, may your life also be filled with colour.